At long last, let's welcome to the show somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for quite some time, somebody that was a head writer at the WWE from 1999 to 2015. He's now the senior vice president of development for $7. He's one of the brains behind the show Tales from the Territories, and the author, of course, of the book that I would hope by now everybody listening to this has read. If you haven't, you've done yourself a great disservice. It's called There's Just One Problem. Brian Gewirtz, welcome, man. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Sam. Well, as we know, I'm not great as the Mets.
Yeah.
I don't want to bring it up immediately, but yeah, this is painful. This is the first public conversation I've had since the vanishing of a 101 feel-good season. But all things considered, could be worse.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things I like people to leave having had a good time talking to me on shows like this, and I realized that after the Mets lost, that my work was going to be sincerely cut out for me, and maybe I can't take on all that responsibility. Maybe that's not all my fault.
Yeah, well, no, I'd like to say it is not all your fault that the Mets lost an excruciating 3-game series to San Diego. One they shouldn't have even been in the first place because they should have won the division. But regardless, we have a good owner, good players. Hopefully next year this will be the start of something as opposed to the end of something.
That's what it is. That's what it always is. It's the start of something. I'm sure at some point you thought your wrestling days were behind you, and now you're bringing professional wrestling to NBC sitcoms and producing documentaries about the territories that you weren't even involved in for Vice. The beginning,
true.
Not the end, the beginning.
Yeah, you never know how things are going to go in life, and thank you for mercifully segging into shows, because I could lament about the Mets for a good 4 or 5 hours. But yeah, we got Young Rock season 3 coming out on NBC November 4th, and Tales from the Territories just debuted on October 4th. It's really, really cool and exciting to see it.
So when you're doing, I mean, the Young Rock episode that I think really caught like wrestling fans' attention was, of course, Rock getting to the WWE and getting to see all of the superstars from '96 represented on television, seeing Luke Hawx play Stone Cold Steve Austin, and everybody was there, right? Was there a pressure that you felt to go, look, the key here is to keep people happy that watch sitcoms on NBC. The mainstream audience is who this is for, but this is really going to work best if wrestling fans are watching this going, oh my God, this is perfect. This is awesome.
Yeah, it was a very, very, it was very, very on the forefront of my mind, especially because that episode, specifically myself and Dwayne and Hiram Garcia, president of $7, we were the writers of that episode. It was an episode that we kind of, really pushed to write ourselves, because this is now, okay, now Uli, who plays 24-year-old Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is leaving, Memphis. He's entering the WWF at 1996 locker room, and if it's not authentic to reality, it's not going to mirror it exactly, of course, but it needs to be as authentic as possible. It needs to pass the smell test with wrestling fans, wrestling people in the industry, watching it and going, okay, this is they're taking mindful notes and good care and making sure that this has a basis in reality, as opposed to, what you often saw in sitcoms, whenever a wrestler was involved, it would be somebody like in a Tarzan outfit, and they'd be screaming, I'm gonna kill you, and that kind of thing, and it bared no resemblance to what wrestling actually was. And that's one of the, we're kind of the guardians of wrestling on Young Rock, $7 specifically. Me being down there in Memphis, I'm not there right now, obviously, because we got a big Black Adam premiere this week, and I thought I'd be celebrating a wild card championship. But normally, I'd be in Memphis, which is where we're shooting season 3 of Young Rock. Season 2 and 1 having taken place in Australia before then. And yeah, we really, and Chavo Guerrero is down there as well. Marty Elias this year too. We're like really, always, and our producing partners, Jeff Chang, Nanashka Khan, Jen Carreras, they really defer to us when it comes to the wrestling. They want it right, even though it would be very, very easy to be like, it's not a big deal. It's like, we're playing to the general audience, as you said, but at the same time, the general audience, I think, wants it to be authentic too, and wants that behind the scenes, POV that really only certain people on set can provide. So that's what we want to always strive to do.
Yeah, and you have an incredibly unique perspective because, like, I mean, although I'm sure, like, Colt Cabana playing the Brooklyn Brawler, he's probably dealt with the Brooklyn Brawler before being from that world. But, like, Adam Ray, for instance, who's the comedian that plays, or I guess he's an actor as well, plays Vince McMahon. There were little things that I noticed that he was doing that was like, that's a Vince-ism. You right? Like, there's this sort of, like, it's not about the tonality. It's not about the voice itself, but it's just about the way certain things are said and movements are made that made me feel like, yeah, somebody that actually knows the character that is Vince McMahon off screen had their hands on this. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah, Adam and I talk about Vince a lot, as you might imagine. And it's kind of like, Dana Carvey, who's a friend of Adam Ray's, when he does George Bush, he's like, yeah, it doesn't, if you like look at it in a vacuum, it's it doesn't necessarily look and sound exactly like George Bush, but it like captures the essence of George Bush. That's what his impression did, to the point where, like, people, when they imitate George Bush now, they don't really imitate George Bush, they imitate Dana Carvey's George Bush.
Right.
It's the same thing in a way with Adam, because he needs to have the presence of Vince, and like subtle things, like if he's on the slamming his hand down, like that's that type of stuff that we talk about that he would do, to really just kind of give a just the overall feel of the character, and everyone on set, by the way, between our our Randy Savage and Pat Patterson and Iron Sheik and Andre the Giant, they all love good wrestling stories. They all like want to soak in as much of the characters as possible. When it's possible, I'll get Michael Hayes on the phone with Young Rock's Michael Hayes. It's like, it's really, I wish I could have listened to that conversation, but it's really, we have that ability, so we definitely want to lean into it.
That's so great. I mean, I could only imagine, right? Because as I was reading your book, I was like, there are weird little parallels in the lives that you and I have led. For instance, the Halloween before you started writing for WWE, which was Halloween 98 or 99, whatever month you start with WWE, you were Mankind for Halloween. And I started going through pictures, and I believe, while I wasn't quite ready to write for WWE yet, I was also Mankind for Halloween the exact same year.
Wow.
And which is okay, all right, well, Mankind was a popular character, but this is the one that I loved. That you told a story about being at Syracuse University and driving back 4 hours so you could be there live for WrestleMania 10. And that one hit me like a ton of bricks, because immediately, and I hadn't thought about this since I was at Syracuse, but I went, oh my God. I left Syracuse and drove back to the city to sit in Madison Square Garden for WrestleMania 20.
Wow.
And did the exact same, like, and I was like, yeah, that's the same journey, except by the time I was there, you were there with The Rock, right?
Yeah, that was that WrestleMania was Rock and Mick, versus Evolution. And yeah, that's really cool. And that was the WrestleMania where, it's, as too, there's so much of the stuff that you see, a lot of stuff, some stuff's forgotten about, a lot of stuff, lives in people's minds forever. And you don't have it until you get to the show sometimes. And you don't even start, like, Rock was there. I remember WrestleMania 20, and like, well, what can we do? What can we do that's unique? And we're just walking around and we see that entranceway. And it's like, oh, what if we do a promo from here where you like literally open the door and walk out into the crowd and the camera follows you and does a big, wide pan and everything. And we're doing it live. And what characters can we get in the surrounding area? Let's get Morocco and Snuka. Let's get Hurricane and Rosie. Let's get, all the, Lillian interviewing all these people. So all of that, yeah, just happened to come together that afternoon as we were just like walking around MSG. But yeah, that's really, really cool. It's a funny parallel. And WrestleMania 10 that I went to, um, that was an awesome WrestleMania, especially when you consider it was, right after WrestleMania 9, which, most people remember for, Mr. Fuji deciding to have Hogan enter the match against a 20 minutes working Yokozuna and lose the title. And even as a fan, I was just like, well, that didn't feel organic. In WrestleMania 11, which I also did a Syracuse road trip for, in Hartford the year after, which had the LT match and everything. But WrestleMania 10, Owen and
Yeah.
Brett, and then, Brett, winning, his big match in the end, and Owen coming out and the stare down. Oh, we were big, as you know, from reading the book, big Owen fans, Brett fans too. But like, that was especially special because, we had been, really ramping up for that moment. That's the reason we wanted to buy tickets and go down there, is to see Owen and Bret Hart.
And then to see Owen win the match, which I don't think
Yeah.
people. So I didn't, as a kid, see that coming at all. I guess in hindsight, it made perfect sense that Brett would lose the match and then steal the moment and everything. But like as a kid, I said, well, there's no way. Like this is just a showcase for Brett, right? There's no way Owen beats Brett. And then to see it actually happen, especially in the way that it did, where it wasn't cheating. I mean, it was lucky, but it wasn't cheating. It was magnificent.
Oh, perfect. I wasn't thinking about that either. Everyone was thinking Brett was going to win.
Of course.
Owen had never won the big one at that point. And then, of course, as like, you put on your Booker hat and like, yeah, Owen is now like has a legitimate claim to have been able to beat his brother, and it's set up like I don't know how many months worth of main events throughout America and the world, when they took it on the road, and the big SummerSlam cage match later that year. It was really awesome. And yeah, that's the fun part, as you know, is like making those 4-hour road trips to go to the big show and getting there and making your signs and just conversing with the people online as you're like waiting to get into MSG and all that kind of thing. It's like it's really, really cool. It's the mindset I always tried to put myself in when I was writing the show, as far as like, yes, you want Vince to approve your storylines and everything, of course, and you want Vince to not go, if this is how you've been spending your creative time, it has been a vast waste of energy, which we've heard on occasion. But at the same time, you want to put yourself in the minds of those fans who are either watching on TV or waiting online to like looking over the merchandise stand and trying to figure out which T-shirt looks cool and all of that type of stuff. And it's something that I always found to be especially when there were like no writers there at WWE, when there were very little, like fewer than 4. That is what I considered my superpower, because my mindset was like, well, listen, I don't have the experience of like the producers, let's say, who've been, in the ring and on the road and are geniuses and have been doing it for decades and decades, but they haven't, spent money on a ticket for a WWE show in forever, if ever. And I have, and I've done that and did it fairly recently. So at least I have that mindset, which no one else does, as far as like being in the office, but also essentially being not far from removed from, a non-working fan.
Yeah. When you're that big of a fan going in, how do you make sure that the stuff that you're writing, especially early, is not derivative? Like, how do you not write like a fan who's kind of just fantasy booking based on stuff they've already seen versus a person who's a writer of a television show coming up with new ideas?
Well, you have to have that mindset going in to, write at this kind of elevated level, because Vince will sniff out, and I'm sure Triple H now will too, anything that feels derivative or feels like, we've seen this, Vince had a famous, saying, oh, that's wrestling. when if you came up with something that he felt was like, kind of done to death, or is just, again, repetitive or what have you, the talent that you work with has a lot to do with that too. Because, as I mentioned in the book, every time I get with Rock, his mindset was like, okay, what can we do that's never been done before? Like, oh, what if something you've never done before? No, no. What has never been done before in the history of the business? That was his like starting point as far as, wanting to put a promo together. And a lot of the, talent had that same mindset as far as like they want to stand out. They don't want to do, you can pay homage to stories from the past and like, oh, I saw Dusty do this once. Let's try it. Like that's really cool and everything. But if you're going to survive as a character, you really need to, stake your own claim and cut your own path and really make yourself unique and you can't be like he's trying to be Roddy Piper or, he's doing a poor man's Ric Flair circa 1985 impression. Like you really need to make yourself stand out. Even if you're not a crazy, flashy, quote unquote gimmick, even if you're just like a, regular person, in your persona, but you need to have, I always gave the mindset of like, if I can go back in time to, let's say high school, let's say sophomore year of high school, which for me is way too early in time to say out loud, but I'll say it like 1989. And I can talk smack to someone there and they had never heard of, they don't know of the wrestlers in the 90s and 2000s. So I could steal anyone's gimmick and, like really, put someone in their place. Imagine talking like Stone Cold Steve Austin or talking like The Rock or talking like, wise ass heel Chris Jericho or babyface Chris Jericho or Edge and Christian back in the day or anyone like that. Like that's when you have a character. Like as opposed to, I'll just give a bad example. Like one of the, let's say the Basham brothers from, the mid 2000s.
Sure.
You are, Danny Basham, go. And it's not a knock on them, like that we didn't serve them well in terms of like, okay, they were part of JBL's cabinet and didn't give them much, stuff to work with. But in general, like if you can't like have that distinctive voice, the playground back in time voice, if that makes sense, then you really are going to be in trouble because you need to be able to be imitated by by somebody in the schoolyard to be, to have your distinctive voice heard. And that's my long rambling way. I should have thought this through a little bit more before explaining it, but I have thought about that before. I always like, oh yeah, I can go like, imagine if nobody had ever heard turn it sideways and shove it straight up your candy ass.
They go nuts. They go nuts for it. Yeah.
Bottom line, because Stone Cold said so, like all that stuff. Like that's so important to be able to like, okay, close your eyes, imitate blank. If you can't do it, or if what you say is just going to be derivative of like, when I become the champion, I'm going to like, well, everybody could say when I become the champion. Mm-hmm. You hear the two words, ooh, yeah. You immediately know who that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Roman finding acknowledge me. Now acknowledge me is a thing.
Yeah, you could successfully do a Roman imitation right now. Go back in time if you needed to. And you couldn't necessarily say that in his I'm the new babyface of WWE, suffer and succotash. I'm going to, that kind of thing, that infamous promo.
As a writer, right? Because obviously you didn't write that promo, but as a writer, I'm sure that you can, I don't know, that you feel for people. The fact that Roman's whole sort of it didn't work at the time babyface run is consistently summed up with suffer and succotash. Suffer and succotash, Roman. That's the one line that everybody points out. Somebody wrote that, right? I don't think Roman came up with it. So as somebody who had that job,
not with it.
I do not think so, no. As somebody who had that job, though, do you go, man, we all take stabs at things, or man, you don't understand, they probably had their back against the wall, or how do you kind of see that?
Well, I mean, I was consulting still, and that must have been 2015 or before, when that line came out, because I remember seeing the script, and I remember because during that time I would give notes on the script, and sometimes they'd make the changes, and sometimes it'd be just like, this is what they want him to say, so sorry. And I remember saying specifically, please, for the love of all things holy, do not have him say suffer and succotash. There's no cool way to spin suffer and succotash, unless you're just completely crapping all over it. He added the word son to it. All right, or at least he gave it a little alliteration, to try to make it sound cool. I give Roman all the credit in the world. He's like, oh man, he's trying. He's trying to make that work. But I think at that point, like that was a case there where, and it's hard because I don't know. I wasn't like, again, I was consulting from home, so I wasn't in the arena. But there were times where I would be in a position like that. And sometimes you gotta read the room a little bit. Like, are there bigger battles to fight? Or do you say, in this case to Vince, like, you just cannot have him say that. And I know, sir, you came up with it. And I know, that like, it makes him human. It makes him fun for kids. I don't know what the rationale was behind it. In that particular case, if like you're arguing with Vince, on like lose the suffer and succotash, and he's just obstinately saying like, no, damn it, he needs to say that. And then at that point, for me personally, I would have, probably said to Roman, like, hey, once you step through the curtain, sometimes people forget their lines. You never, maybe that just slipped your mind. Like, oh yeah, I forgot suffer and succotash when you step back through the curtain. That might not be. It might be bad. Not be a bad thing to take the heat for forgetting it. Of course, the danger in that is like Vince doubles down and goes, all right, well, next week you're saying it twice on the air, like that kind of thing. Those are the minefields you gotta have to navigate when you're backstage at WWE Creative.
Which is so much fun to hear about. That's why the book is so great, because I think that there's like, as deep as fans, as deep as our perspective can go, it can only go so deep because there is still so much that we don't see. Are you just a guy who's got a thick skin? Is this something you developed as a kid or when you were at MTV, or is this something that you just realized that you had the ability to take on very quickly at WWE? Because just here, forget about the book, just in the way that you're describing your interactions, there would be moments, it sounds like, where it wouldn't be, I don't think we're going to do that idea. It would be, we're not doing that idea because you are an idiot. And it's like, that can be tough for some people, right?
Yeah, well, you develop it a little bit at WWE. You kind of have to. I mean, the truth is, I would take any, like, even slightest slight or disparaging remark, and it would stew in my head. I try my hardest not to sell it, even though there were many times I would sell it. Like, I got plenty of, and I didn't even realize I'm selling it. I had plenty of side conversations with Stephanie McMahon, where she'd be like, when you hear something you don't like and you do this eye roll, it really doesn't come off as very. I'm like, oh shoot, did I do the eye roll? I realized I did the eye roll. Like,
the patented Gewirtz eye roll. I didn't mean to do that.
Said something and you were just like, oh my god, like, oh, I didn't even. I got to work on that. That's true. There was like, it's funny. I would say I had, and still do have sometimes. It ranges from thin to thick depending on what it is. But at a certain point at WWE, the skin would definitely become thicker because you realize, when you're first starting, everything's a matter of life and death. And every angle and every line and every match that you propose, it's like you start clinging to that and really wanting, taking personal offense if it's not used. And, like, I remember being, very angry at certain points. Like, I turned in a promo and Vince would be like, it's not very classy. And be like, man, you wouldn't know classy if you wore a monocle and a top hat and carried around the New Yorker with you. What the hell do you know about class? And then just calm down.
Yep.
There's an opinion. There are, as Vince would say, there's more than one right way to do things. So, as the years went on, you try to. I wouldn't say I did this successfully every time, but you definitely try to, hey, there's a brand new show next week. There's always going to be a new show. Just because, this didn't work out the way you specifically wanted it to. And by the way, you're not the boss. So you don't have that power to make it exactly the way you want to. Tomorrow, next week is a brand new show. So try to make it work then, as opposed to going home and just, and in some ways it's nice that that you care so much, and it's not just about ego, but you really want it to be, because you feel like that would have worked best on the show. And sometimes you've proven wrong. Oh shoot, you didn't even have to do it that way. That way's great. And sometimes, of course, and those are the times you remember. I remember like Vince, by the way, was the same way. I remember at one point there was a vignette with Snoop Dogg and Santino. And I think Santino's dressed like Charlie Brown for some reason, probably because Snoop has a dog attached to his name. And it was, some stupid backstage, funny, stupid vignette. And I remember I was insistent on ending it with Santino saying, "Good grief." As Charlie Brown would say.
Yeah.
And Vince is like, not for it at all, but he's like, all right, if that's what you're saying. And we did it. And Santino said, "Good grief." It got no response whatsoever. You could hear a pin drop. Maybe they were just still contemplating, why is this grown man dressed as Charlie Brown? But I remember Vince finding me and was like, "I knew it. I knew it wouldn't get a pop. I told you." Like, all right, well, leadership by example. Let's not be petty. But yeah, sometimes that happens. You just gotta move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I feel like it's life advice. I was there for a pre-show once, and there was something that had happened, and one day I'll tell the whole story, but one of the people who's not there anymore came up to me and said, "Hey Sam, just looking out for you. There's a little bit of heat on you for this," which already you're like, what, Yeah. I just got it. And he's like, and this was the advice, and this is the advice I've taken with me way outside of wrestling. He goes, "Just no selling babyface and you should be fine." And it's like, that's not for wrestling. That's for just about every scenario in life. If you no sell and babyface, or just smile and be nice and polite, it's like, nothing happened. It doesn't exist.
That's true. Yeah, that's the way you're supposed to be. But, if you have any sort of human side to you at all,
right?
Like they say, you got to eat shit and like the taste of it. Like, there's just not a natural emotion that people have. But some people there, and maybe it's the same person you're talking about. I don't know, because he's not there anymore, but was the master of that. Mm-hmm. It was like anything. It would just smile and be like, "Yep, no problem." And that's great. That's a great attribute and everything. But you also got a kind of a sense of like, does this person feel anything inside? Right. Or are they a vessel that is just like robotically, smile and say, "Babe, no sell babyface, no sell babyface." It's like, yeah, in some cases, okay, we're going to have this entrance first instead of the entrance that you want it to be first. Great, smile and babyface. If it's something that's like you truly feel passionate about, that was what I was, the wave I was riding and navigating at WWE was like, we want you to be passionate. We want you to have, your strong voice. We don't want you to be a yes man, but you also have to convey your ideas in a respectful way. And you can't, you can't be like showing people up or that kind of thing, which is much easier, I think. Well, in theory, is much easier now on the last vestiges of my 40s than it was, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, because, you're just, full of piss and vinegar and you want to make your name. And you're also, a quote unquote, regular person in a sea of giants and so much, energy that comes, if you don't kind of try to match that energy, you could really be left behind and left in the dust. So, it's kind of hard to be like a passive smiling yes and no sell, but it's also very vital that you do it. Like,
yeah.
It's such a labyrinth of, conflicting emotional, mental notes that you always have to have in your head, but you just do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's just reality, and then you get out of it, and you're like, "What the hell just happened for the last 15 years?" Um,
Yeah, but to your point though, it does apply in the real world too.
yeah,
There are plenty of battles on set, or when you're giving notes on a show or whatever. It's like yes, not everything needs to be like this life and death. Like, you know what? Some of these points you're going to get, some of these points you're not going to get. Don't take it personally if a note that you give or something or what have you, or a joke or whatever isn't going to be used. You got to rise above that, because for the betterment of the show and for the betterment of your own well-being, you're just going to lose your mind if you are going into battle on every single little thing. It's important to prioritize.
I loved in the book. I felt like there was this nice sort of sprinkled throughout, this full circle relationship with Triple H that I thought was really nice. That it was really clearly not great at the beginning, and then by the end, it's like you've developed this respect for each other and everything. And it was just I don't know. There was something great about that, right? Because that's what you want. That's what it put a bow on it for me. But what I loved, right? Because there are impressions that you hear that just become the impression, right? The Christopher Walken impression, like everybody kind of does Jay Moore's Christopher Walken impression or whatever. And I feel like there are so many Triple H impressions that are based on that Rock promo where he just says, between every word. Like, I remember seeing that as a fan and going like, I never even noticed that was a thing. But I remember it hitting me so hard as a fan that became like the go-to Triple H impression no matter what. So the fact that not only did you kind of come up with it, but maybe my favorite story in the whole book, that The Rock made you pitch the Triple H impression with Triple H in the room was just about the greatest thing I'd ever heard.
Oh yeah, I mean that was pretty early on. I think that was in 2000, and the stage being set for that, with us coming up with the idea for the promo, me pitching to him doing the Triple H voice, and then pitching it to Vince, which normally would be easy. But when we went into Vince's office, which at the time, this is pretty incredible to consider, the writing team was so small that the writers shared an office with Vince. The writers didn't get their own little office until 2002. We would share our office with Vince. So we would go in, and at that time, Triple H and all of DX and Stephanie were all there. And Rock was setting up the promo, and he's like, "Oh, you're going to love it, Hunter." Yeah, I go in, and I say, "Triple H, every time you open your mouth, you sound exactly like this." And then he stops and goes, "Brian, go ahead, do the voice." Me? And like, well, you have to do it in TV. We should hear how you do it. He's like, "But I'm learning from you when you do it." And like Vince is like, "Damn it, Brian, do the damn voice." So yeah, I was put on the spot with 8 people in the room. I think the producers of the match were in the room too. And my problem back then, which I didn't really realize at the time, was it wasn't so much coming up with like, "Oh, here's a way for The Rock to insult the character of Triple H." It was the fact that, whether through misunderstanding, thinking that Triple H did his own thing, or through intimidation, or through whatever, I would never approach Triple H with, "Oh, well, here's something you could say to The Rock." It was always one-sided.
Right.
So I understand now, in hindsight, how it's like, this little MF, he's always coming up with ways to insult. And I get it. He's a heel. He gets insulted by baby faces. But at the same time, if you're such this great writing talent that you seem to think you are, well, where's my material, for my opponent? You never come up with me with that. And it took me a while for me to realize, which should be kind of obvious, like, yeah, I could understand that point of view. But yeah, like you said, I'm really, really happy. It doesn't really work if you're working at a company for 15 years and, you're just like, antagonistical relationship with a certain person who you respect, but also, don't connect with, at least at the beginning. I'm really, really happy that, that relationship on my part matured and was able to have like that mutual respect grow. I'm going to Raw later tonight. I'll be happy to see Triple H. Whenever I see him, it's always like it's like a I don't want to diminish, actual, people who've I don't even want to say it, it's so ridiculous, but it's basically like it's obviously not going to war or anything like that. It's not even close, but it is similar in the sense of a shared experience that only people who actually experienced it can relate to. So like that's the type of thing, anyone who's worked in that environment under the microscope on live TV for so many years, if at a certain point, a mutual respect, just has to develop. Otherwise, something has gone really, really wrong. So I'm really glad it did. And I think, by the way, and I know we're going to get to it, but I know like the Tales from the Territory show,
Yeah.
that we have on the air now on Vice is something that like Triple H, being a huge, huge old school wrestling fan and fan of the territories himself, I think he finds it pretty cool. I think that we're doing that show.
I think it's cool that you're doing that show because, first of all, I think it's cool that, and I don't think people have really wrapped their heads around the fact that the guy in charge of WWE is a wrestling geek now, right? Like it's a guy who's grown up with this and is passionate about, is a wrestling fan. Triple H is a wrestling fan and a historian of this stuff, and I think that's really, really cool. But I also think the Tales from the Territory show is so great because, like, and I think it was like the Memphis episode's great. The Kaufman episode is fantastic because you get to hear from Lawler's perspective, and there's just a lot of new insight, believe it or not. But like the episode that I knew, this is not like the other storytelling shows. The AWA episode is out of control. Like, it is totally out of control. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. And it's important too, because like Mad Dog Vachon, hanging out of a plane while in the air, those aren't the stories that get like repeated every Raw anniversary and or SmackDown anniversary and that type of thing. Whether they have the library or not, we love to be able to, get those stories and like put it on, a national platform like it is now, with AWA. It's certainly like plenty of stories that, you heard about in the locker room, and to actually hear Ken Patera, tell his McDonald's window story firsthand and have other people kind of question it like right then and there. It's like really, really fun to hear and then actually see reenacted. We're so thrilled with this series. As we get into, the other episodes coming up, with World Class and Polynesian Pacific, from Dwayne's grandmother and grandfather, and Stampede with Bret Hart and Abdullah the Butcher. I just watched a cut of the Florida episode, that has Kevin Sullivan and Jerry Briscoe, amongst others. It's just like, if you're an old school fan of the territories, you'll definitely appreciate it. If you're just a modern fan of WWE or AEW and really don't know, you've kind of seen maybe a story or two in a shoot video or on a website or in an old, classic Apter magazine or something like that. To actually see these now come to life, I think it's a real treat.
Well, yeah, that's what it is, and the stories come to life. Like it's no longer just, I saw somebody tell the story on a shoot interview or I seen pictures of it in a magazine. It's the way they're describing the stories. There's a whole round table of people. Oh yeah, I was there, and adding detail to it, and then with the reenactment, all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this really happened. Like this isn't a legend of something. This is a thing that happened in that guy's life.
Yeah, it's so cool to see because, all of a sudden you look up and, in my mind, like the 70s and 80s and even like the early 90s, like, oh yeah, that wasn't too long ago. And then you actually like do the math and you stop for a second. You stop yourself and go, wait a second, this was like 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
When when I, compartmentalize that, and like that would be the equivalent of like I'm working at WWE in 2000, and we're talking about like stories from like the 50s and 60s, which seemed like ancient history when I was there, at the time. And now it's like you gotta be able to it's like the perfect sweet spot to tell these stories with people who live them, and are thankfully available to speak on the show, and even the people who've passed on to be able to tell their stories, at least one secondhand, if not firsthand, if they weren't there, is really cool. And, you might not be able to do that 10, 20 years from now, but you can do it now. So it's something that like, it really is a treat for wrestling fans, and we're all wrestling fans, myself, The Rock, Hiram Garcia, like everyone, Danny, everyone at $7. It's like we want to, and we do. Obviously, there's a giant movie coming out this month that Black Adam has nothing to do with wrestling. There's lots and lots, almost every movie project, save from Fighting with My Family, and almost every television project, is pretty non-wrestling based. But we also feel like if there's a good wrestling project that we can, attach ourselves to as producers and help create and help grow and help bring to life, we definitely want to be in on that.
Yeah, and I think that too, like, and I was talking to Evan Husney about this a few weeks ago, that like I think there's such a value to capturing these stories, and like to me as a fan, like these things should be preserved as historical documents, and they should be put on shows like this that will be forever things. These docu shows, whatever you want to call them, are things that will last forever, and it'll make it so the stories don't just kind of fade away or get muddled through generations of telling them. And that hasn't always been the case with wrestling. And I feel the same way about like what we're talking about with Young Rock, where like, yeah, you'd watch Boy Meets World and Vader would be on it, and Vader would be portrayed as actually having a problem with his opponent, which I don't think draws new fans in because everybody watching knows that that's nonsense. But I think that when Young Rock is able to go behind the curtain and actually kind of go, this is what the business of wrestling is, now all of a sudden I'm not getting treated like an idiot, and I'm kind of into this. If you're going to be able to draw new fans in, I think that's the way that it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should point out that Vader being on Boy Meets World led to me being able to get a last row ticket for WrestleMania 12.
That's right.
Yeah. My friend John was a PA on the show, and he asked Vader for a ticket. Somehow we got our tickets. My friend Jason brought his "I would like a Mantar sandwich" sign. It doesn't make any sense, but you remember these things. But yeah, I mean, it's something that, like, again, I should make myself a fake badge, because with WP written on it, standing for Wrestling Police.
Yeah.
Because I'm usually the one like barging, like, what did we say wrong now? Well, Rock would say he's not going over with the fans, he's getting over with the fans.
Yes.
Facing the fans in a match, he would be going over. But if he goes over, that means hopefully he gets over and is over. Which working the gimmick, but he could also grab a gimmick to hit someone with.
Yeah.
He's like,
And by the way, a person could be a gimmick, and that's a totally different thing.
Oh yeah, this guy's a gimmick.
Yeah, he's a gimmick.
Working his gimmick.
Yeah.
And he, and it's like, oh, well, does he have a chair or something? Can he just use a gimmick? There's a whole like separate language that, I'm usually there to translate, because there was a stretch. And by the way, the writers of Young Rock are also huge fans. They watch, countless videos, on YouTube, and are always, open to questions and everything. But there was a little streak they had going, which we laugh about now, of like every iteration of the word over was the wrong use. Over 5 and overs. Like, no, did we get it this? Like, not exactly. Now I think they speak over and wrestling and certain terms pretty flawlessly.
Yeah. Do you really think that Al Snow was the worst name for a wrestler that Vince McMahon had ever heard?
I mean, that's a trap here are 2 traps that starting writers fall into at WWE. Mm-hmm. And forgive me, because apparently apparently my hard line is going off. I don't know if you can hear
I
that.
did hear that.
Okay. Yeah, and
It's
of
like,
course
what's
it's
that
got
sound?
yeah, I know. Again, I'm a relic. But they're the two. I don't even know who's calling. It's a spam call. This is history in a way.
Yeah.
Because, people don't have hard lines anymore. All right, it's finally stopped.
Okay.
Anyways, the two traps that people fall into when they first start writing at wrestling. First is getting addicted to cheap heat almost immediately, because that's the easiest way for you to get like, oh my God, 20,000 people responded to something that I wrote. I'm like, well, yes, that's the good news. The bad news is it doesn't really take a lot of brains going to Boston and go like, man, unlike the Bruins, I'm going to win a championship. Boo. So you need to treat those things very cleverly and try to put a spin on it that, would make it entertaining for someone who has no vested interest in either of those bands. You could write a whole separate book on cheap heat and the wonders of it, the positives, the negatives. But the other thing is becoming friends with wrestlers too quickly, to the point where, Vince or Hunter or whoever can sniff it out and be like, oh, okay, I see this guy. In my case, I'm buddying up with Al Snow. I hit it off with him when we were shooting these vignettes with him and Steve Blackman back in the day. Al's a great guy and he's very funny and personable. And, I would push Al and Al Snow matches to the point of being very detrimental to Al himself, because it's like, this fucking guy and his Al Snow obsession, like to the point where it was just like, will you please stop pitching Al Snow? And I think the fact that I was pitching Al Snow so much probably, somewhere in Vince's head as we were making a drive in the Carolinas, I think, was like, what is his obsession with Al Snow? Al Snow. Stupid thing anyway. And then just blurting out loud after the conversation about Al had ended 20 minutes ago, like, there's no name in professional wrestling worse than Al Snow. I'm like, boy, I've really done a disservice to this person I'm trying to help.
Oh, I just love stories like that. Because also, I was such an Al Snow fan. I still have it here. It's what I use it to focus cameras now. But I got this for my birthday.
Oh, nice.
And it's, my mom went out and found a mannequin head because I was such an Al Snow fan. I don't know if she got the Who Wants Head double entendres or anything like that.
That's something I'll let you work out, your therapist. But that is very cool. And, Al had basically, and he still had the What Does Everybody Want, the theme music and everything. But when I started, like Head was still part of his gimmick, but we were trying to do, other things with him. That's why we did the stuff with Steve Blackman, Head Cheese. I pitched the idea of him coming out in a different European outfit every time he was defending the European title, again, just to make it entertaining. It's a cold match between Al Snow and Viscera, let's say, on SmackDown. Well, what can we do? Well, what if Al is celebrating Luxembourg because he is the European champion? All right. And then all right, let's get all these props and magic and let's have him come out in lederhosen one day and all this type of thing. And Al always played it to the hilt perfectly. I'm glad I could, in the midst of accidentally torpedoing, his ending with Vince, that we could actually sneak in some good stuff along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's important. Your run is so incredible because I don't think that at the time most fans were going okay, the same kind of creative forces around the end of the Attitude Era are, there are crossovers all the way into the guest host era and all this. Do you think that I feel like the guest host era, I say respectfully, is not necessarily looked at as favorably amongst fans with some of the other eras that you were involved with? Are there some gems that people are missing buried in that Raw guest host era?
Oh, definitely. And, as you know, I dedicated a whole chapter to the guest host era.
Of course.
It's amazing that it lasted for almost over a full year.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about. There were, I think everyone is kind of in agreement on the best shows from that era. Most people liked the Bob Barker episode a great deal. They liked Hugh Jackman. They liked Mike Tyson. Shaquille O'Neal was really good. Ozzy Osbourne. People liked, and then there was the anytime, even Seth Green when he kicked it off, that went really well. But there are times, I guess. Well, first of all, as you know, there's no way. The whole idea was born out of how could we just take a break from the heel GM character, and that segged into, well, what if it was a different legend every week who was the GM, and that's went to what if it was a different celebrity every week, and then that turned into, well, what if we're just like Saturday Night Live, only better,
Only better.
only better, yeah. What has the SNL people done for the world?
Yeah, Brian, I know you always wanted to write for SNL. What if we could do it,
Yeah.
but better?
Better, because we have Jerry Springer doing a Who's the Father segment with the Bella twins. Yeah, that was those were the gems, I think, but there were also just a lot of fun in that's the stories of telling in the book of like the backstage, behind the scenes stuff. And I got to like meet and become friends with Dr. Ken Jeong,
Yep.
from the Jeremy Piven episode, who, very bravely, agreed to get himself thrown out of the ring from John Cena, and was assured by everyone that he would be caught safely. And he was caught, but I don't think he landed safely, as his head smacked against the steel, entranceway, and he had to stitch himself up. And just like, that's the thing, like the pacing, like waiting for Ken to come out and going, oh my God, is he going to be pissed? I thought I had this brand new friend. Now he's going to hate me. What's going to happen? Is he going to badmouth WWE to everyone he knows in Hollywood? Or is our reputation going to be sunk? And then he comes out and is just like so full of, adrenaline and positive energy. And he was like, that was awesome. And apologizing to me. And like, I'm so sorry I didn't take that bump right. And like, Ken, no, personally, we're glad you're not suing all of us, but, also glad that you're okay and are happy about this. It's like those little things. I think the guest host era was probably, I think it was an idea that was, if you like combine all the really good guest hosts, I think you'll get like a good, let's be generous, let's say a good 2 months worth of television. But the issue was it was 12 months.
Right. Yeah. There's probably, yeah. I'd say 8 is fair out of 52. Yeah. 8 out of 52 is pretty good. Right.
Yeah. And then there were some that were, and then ultimately, and again, as I wrote in the book, when David Hasselhoff in the UK, when he had all these, Hasselhoff is great. I mean, he like, at this point, Dave Kapoor, was one of the former writers of WWE, the former Ranjan Singh of the Great Khali fame. He'd come up to me because Dave is, as you know, like, the friendliest, most affable person, and he's not faking it. He just is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great hang. And he'd come up to me like, hey, Brian, yeah, man, so Hasselhoff wants a group of people to be hanging out in the parking lot chanting Hoff, Hoff, Hoff. And then he gets out of his big truck, and then they follow him into the arena all the way in the ring, and they're chanting Hoff. I'm like, okay. And then he's got to somehow make the Intercontinental title match at SummerSlam. Like, none of this makes sense anymore. The Hasselhoff show was when Vince finally said, okay, these guest hosts no longer have the power to make matches. They're just going to be there. And that's when you saw like a turning point. That's when it all started to wane a little bit, where it's like they'd have their one segment, but it wouldn't be like we'd go into their guest host office and then people would be arguing and they'd make a match and that kind of thing. Because it was just like a very, very unfair position to put them in, especially the non-wrestling fans who had to now learn all this exposition and, but it's going to be a no disqualification match. But you got to remember, it's going to be taking place this Sunday night live on pay-per-view.
Right.
On the WWE network and like all that kind of thing, where it's like, I just want to come in and have fun. What am I doing here? I have so much information to give that ultimately, it kind of fizzled and then changed. And then it's like, hey, if a celebrity happens to be on the show this week, great. but now they don't have the onus of, having to book matches and be in charge and remember a lot of things, which is the way it should have been in the first place. And it never should have been an era to begin with, but it did. And, somehow we all survived.
The Nexus angle, as cool as that first thing was, it's kind of, one of those. The Nexus is the example for angles that start super hot and just like whoops, missed it, and it doesn't end the way it should end. Was that one where you were like, I don't know if we should do this, or yeah, on paper this makes sense, and then upon execution you're like, oh wait, yep, shouldn't have done that?
It's hard when sometimes, that's the pitfalls and perils of booking by the seat of your pants sometimes.
Sure.
Sometimes you can have, and Vince, to his credit, he pitched the whole Nexus angle at the beginning. I remember watching, I'm like, is he just making this up as he goes, or has he thought about this? But he thought all those guys and the giant attack, and then of course there's stuff you can't predict, like them firing Daniel Bryan after the Justin Roberts, choking incident, what have you. But then that led to Daniel coming back. I know there was a lot of internal debate as far as, should Nexus go over in the big SummerSlam match or not? And, a lot of voices, producers, talent, everyone had a say in that. I think you could look at it back in hindsight and be like, well, Nexus was supposed to be an entity to be feared and to be reckoned with for some time. They probably should have went over in that match as opposed to losing, because it's like their aura of invincibility, takes a big hit when they come back. And even though it was a great feel good moment with Daniel Bryan coming back and everything, and you have to have a happy ending, babyface is prevailing at some point. But that might have been a bit too early. And that's, again, one of the many, like, okay, great, you have a hot beginning. There's so many, the much reviled, for good reason, Invasion angle had a super hot beginning.
Yes.
And when ECW and WCW joined forces that night, and I believe Cleveland, that was super, super hot. But that was also the perils of having, 2 shows a week, 3 shows, include Heat, 4 shows if you include pay-per-view, of like, well, we're going to map this out. We'll go as we go. But right now we got to go and do it, because if you wait on the Invasion, if you wait a year, it's not going to have the same impact as it would be if you do it right now while the iron's hot. And we have no idea which talent are, going to be eventually joining us. So there's no guarantee you could do it ever. I just bought WCW. We're doing Invasion. Here are our players. Go. And, you gotta navigate that. You gotta see how the audience responds to it. You gotta see sometimes, in the midst of, a great Booker T is going to make this great, run in King of the Ring 2001. And then unfortunately, Austin gets injured during it. And so now, like, that will change the whole dynamic.
Sure.
That will lead to Austin and Angle, having these very memorable vignettes with Mr. McMahon that people still remember to this day. So, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, it's difficult sometimes when to have a long-term angle, to know the end of it when you start, because there's so many variables as far as, like, well, who of the group is really going to, like, stand out and get over, and how will the audience respond to it? And sometimes the baby faces they're going to have long angles with get hurt, and that changes the whole dynamic. But in general, I always, I was kind of like the annoying, person in the movie, being like, well, excuse me, sir, before we do this, could we just sit and talk about the logistics of the situation? Like, no, damn it, we're men of action. We got to go in there and do it now. Like, okay, but we don't really have a plan to end this. It's like one of those things. And hopefully, the dynamic now in WWE, it's a lot more structured. Some say it's a good thing. Some say it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that, angles are thought of more. I know they just hired a new director of long-term storytelling, which would have been a great thing, back in the day for a lot of these angles. And in fact, they did try to have people like that at some point. And I just remember, their ideas not being received very well. And it's not necessarily because they were bad ideas. It was because I know that is the certain people that I'm thinking of, as they're going on this, and then in month 4 this happens, then in month 5 this happens, and I'm sitting there in the room being like, oh my God, Vince stopped listening after month 1. This is not going to work. But yeah, it's a whole new dynamic now.
Yeah. Yeah, I also in the book I loved the Michael Cole stories, but the thing that I loved was the text you included from Michael Cole, because as somebody that has, spent some time around Cole, I thought that text you included, there's just something about it, just the way that's who Michael Cole is. The text that he sent you at the end that says, I don't give a shit, it happened, LOL. You can write whatever you want. Like that's, I feel like Michael Cole is like whoever the Game of Thrones character is that walks through the fire and just keeps going, and it like nothing. It just keeps going and does what he's there to do. I loved it, and then of course, I also loved the fact that he had to use the plane and yeah, it was great. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, talk about no selling and smiling. I mean, like, if anyone has been able to, navigate and survive and come out stronger on the other end, the perils and pitfalls of life backstage in WWE. I mean, I'd love to hear the Michael Cole book or the Michael Cole story one day. Sean Coulthard, another Syracuse grad, who, again, is gone through so much and he really is the ultimate company man. I mean, to the point now where people, thankfully, I don't think, much of the modern audience now is actually looking at him the way we as fans looked at JR back in the day, like institution and this, like, oh, he's the voice of WWE. Cole used to say that to get boos, I'm the voice of WWE. Cole, again, he didn't come to us and say, let me be this crazy, outrageous heel character. We came to him in that. I tried this thing once called Top Rope Theater, which was just this, some of these episodes are on YouTube, just absolutely ridiculous, surreal backstage vignettes, where I think Kelly is kidnapped, and it was Howard Finkel who did it. It was supposed to be like this over the top, ridiculous soap opera type thing. And I think there was a couple episodes in there that we had like Michael Cole give a heel line, which was really, really funny at the time because he was so straight laced. And so he's your, non-biased regular announcer. And then when we did turn him heel, sometimes back in the day, Vince would have his pet project and his favorite toys. And for whatever reason, heel Michael Cole became Vince's obsession, to the point where well, what about the money drawing angles we need to work on? I'm like, what is Cole doing? Gonna be in a glass box or something? That was great.
The Cole,
he did that truly like the ultimate company man. And then one day Vince was like, okay, we're putting an end to it. And then he was just straight laced announcer again.
Yeah.
The whole thing has been a bad dream. That's who Cole is. It's like anything you ask him to do, he'll do it and do it, happily.
Yeah. Yeah. I could spend another hour talking to you about just the Michael Cole heel angle, because I'm obsessed. But I won't. You got a lot of stuff to do. I do want to know, with you getting back into this wrestling world, doing all these interviews that you've done on a bunch of the podcasts, having the book out, Tales from the Territories, Young Rock, I feel like, your name is just coming up a lot more in wrestling conversations. Have any companies outside of WWE, AEW, or anyone else come to you and been like, look, I know you're busy. I know you're working with $7. I know you're an EVP over there, but is there any way that you would dip your toe back into writing for wrestling?
No, I haven't, it's, people know, if they either, that I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. I've also never had the opportunity to, go really backstage at any other show. Every time AEW has been in Queens, for instance, I've been either in Australia or Memphis for Young Rock. So I don't really even know many backstage behind the scenes people at other companies. I just know the talent. And it would obviously, if anyone ever asks, it's a very, flattering and nice thing to have inquired about it. But, I love what I'm doing now, and I love being able to work on Just a whole spectrum of different types of projects, both scripted, unscripted, docuseries, documentaries, features, as far as contributing whatever I can on the feature end. So it's really something, it's like every day. I know it's like kind of like a little cringeworthy to say, but like every day really is a new adventure because there's just so many projects on the table that I get to be a part of. And that was really, as you saw, in the book and everything else, like that was my issue towards my end of my WWE run, in the sense of like I really was like hitting a wall as far as like, is this all there is? There's got to be more to this world out there than just who's going over on Monday night. So finally I got to segue to a different world, and it's been great ever since.
But it's all a nice through line. It starts at MTV and working with The Rock, and it brings you to this place where you're developing some of the best television and film that is happening right now. It's really, really cool, man. The book is awesome. You know what a fan I am of that. Tales from the Territories is on Vice every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and it really is. I mean, it's an amazing show for anybody, whether you like Dark Side, whether you don't. It's just, I feel like we are getting to that place, like you said, you lose track of how long it's been. And there was a time when I think the territories were discussed a lot. And I think that we're not realizing that time is slipping away, and that history is becoming stuff that existed after the territories did. So the fact that this is still there, I think, is really, really, really cool.
Cool. Yeah, no, appreciate it. Appreciate all of it, and feel the same way. And there's I believe there's we got 9 brand new episodes of Tales from the Territories coming, and I think the first episode on Memphis is up on YouTube as well. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it yet.
It's great. Check it out. And Brian Gewirtz, thank you so much for making some time, man.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me. Let's do it again.
For sure.